So I'm very pleased to be talking to Associate Professor Kate Seear, who authored Law, Drugs and the Making of Addiction, Just Habits, which won the SLSA Theory and History Prize in 2020. So thank you, Kate, so much for joining us.
Thanks, Simon. It's a pleasure.
Perhaps I could begin by actually hiding my view first, and then saying once again, congratulations on the book, which is a really wonderful book and a really important addition, I think, to socio-legal research. Perhaps we could begin by just saying a bit about where you kind of found the inspiration for writing the book in the first place. What led you to begin writing it?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Simon, for those kind words. It's really nice of you. So I should say, before I forget, I'd like to acknowledge the Australian Research Council, which funded the research upon which the book was based, and I'm really grateful to them for their guidance, and to everybody who supported the book in many ways, including all the participants in my research. The inspiration for the book goes back a few years. So there has been a developing field over the last decade or so of critical alcohol and other drug scholarship that utilises insights from science and technology studies, feminist theory, queer theory, to problematise kind of core assumptions about the way drugs work, core assumptions about the effects of drugs, and to really destabilise our assumptions about forms of harm that are associated with alcohol and other drugs. And I found a lot of that work really inspiring and interesting, but that work primarily has been done on alcohol and other drug policy and alcohol and other drug service provision. There hasn't been much research that looks critically, using those kind of theoretical tools, at how alcohol and other drugs are conceptualized in law, and in particular, how the law actually constitutes forms of harm associated with alcohol and other drugs. So I really wanted to try and extend that critical drug scholarship into the field of law, and also beyond looking just at the criminal law, to look at how it is that alcohol and other drug issues come up in a range of different areas of law, and to think critically about the way that legal processes produce forms of harm that are understood to precede legal processes. So that's the kind of basic background and inspiration for the book, and what I tried to do with the book.
Thank you. Super interesting. And did you did the book emerge over a number of years, or was it the kind of thing that you just felt you could sit down and write in a few months? Or what was that process like for you?
It's a bit of both, actually. So it definitely emerged over a number of years. I started doing this research way back in 2013, and it sort of unfolded gradually over the next couple of years. And then I received funding from our research council to pursue the research more deliberately. So, but the actual work of writing the book probably unfolded over a period of 6 months or so in 2018, 2019. After many years of sitting with and thinking through these ideas, and also collecting data. The book draws on a number of data sources, in particular interviews that I undertook with lawyers in Australia and Canada. Also interviews with decision makers in Australia, so judges, magistrates, other statutory decision makers. And then it also looks at case law and legislation. So I collected those data over a long period of time, and kind of sat with it and thought about it, and then I had a really dedicated period of writing to produce the book. Great.
And did it like I suppose one of the things that's quite interesting, one of the many things that's really interesting about the book is that although it's theoretically very sophisticated, you also are very attentive to how things might be otherwise. I wondered if you could maybe say a bit about that as well.
Yeah, sure. So I guess one of the key themes, one of the key themes to come out of my research was that, as I sort of flagged earlier, that alcohol and other drugs are understood to produce certain effects or to generate certain forms of harm and to produce certain consequences in the form of social problems. So one of the most prominent examples perhaps that came out of the research and, you know, as a kind of discourse that we hear more broadly in society is that alcohol and drugs produce family violence. That there's a clear link and a clear association between those two things. And understood this way, the job of people working in the law is to try and reduce those forms of harm, to respond to and regulate and control alcohol and other drug use. And the assumption is that that will reduce social problems like family violence. But a key finding of this research, and this came out very clearly through my discussions with lawyers in particular, is actually that in the work that they do, they themselves regularly constitute links or enact links between alcohol and drugs and family violence, usually for strategic purposes. So to give you an example, one way that might happen is that if I'm a lawyer representing a client who's been accused of family violence, lawyers will often decide that it is strategically useful and valuable to explain that person's conduct, the family violence that they've perpetrated, as an effect of, say, their drug consumption. And they might do that because they may adjudge that a particular magistrate will view them more sympathetically. They might get a reduced sentence. They might be able to go off and have drug treatment and you know, return to the family home or continue to work, these kinds of things. And so a core thread that came out of the interviews I did with lawyers is that actually the link between family violence and other problems and alcohol and other drugs is actually an effect of legal practice rather than something that precedes legal practice, and that it exists kind of as a stable connection, a stable phenomenon outside of the law. And once we start to see that lawyers and legal processes constitute these links and solidify and stabilise public understandings of major problems like family violence, we can begin to sort of unpack and think about the political and ethical problems that might flow from that work, and to look at the way that we might do things otherwise. And in fact, you know, the lawyers that I spoke to themselves felt very conflicted about this kind of work that they did, the strategic connections that they drew between drugs and alcohol and these kinds of problems, and felt that they needed to reflect more critically on themselves and their work, and perhaps to destabilise those links if possible.
That was really interesting, and yeah, I think that really came out in your writing. Was yeah, it's quite a nuanced sort of way to explore what the lawyers were saying, and I think that not everybody, you know, wouldn't necessarily have been picked up by all researchers. And I suppose another question I had in mind when you were talking was whether you kind of enjoyed actually I'll ask another question first, sorry. Whether you felt that there were any kind of the conclusions that you draw from your book, whether there are any insights that would be useful for sort of socio-legal research more generally?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think and hope, I suppose, most of all, that the work demonstrates the utility of science and technology studies and its value for the study of law more broadly. I know that there are a number of scholars who use principles from science and technology studies to study legal practices, but I think there could be a lot more of that kind of work being done. I feel, you know, obviously I find it very exciting and valuable, and that it potentially pushes us into new realms when thinking about the constitution of subjects and objects through law. I think there are really interesting observations that can be made about legal ontologies through science and technology studies and through feminist science studies. So I guess for me, that's probably the main one that I hope that the book introduces people, not necessarily everyone, but at least some people, to some new theoretical tools that are valuable, and that they might take that up and consider applying it in other areas of research. I think anybody who's involved in studying the law will be interested in principles of, often fairness, justice, and kind of ethical and political questions about the way the law responds to problems or intervenes in problems or deals with certain kinds of subjects. And I think science and technology studies gives us a great set of tools for thinking differently about what it is that the law does and produces.
And with that, in terms of the process of writing the book itself and thinking about other people who might be thinking of writing a book, do you have any kind of advice about that process? Was it something that you enjoyed, or is enjoyed not the right word? Perhaps you could say a bit more about that.
Look, I will say, Simon, that when I finished the book, I did say to some friends and to my partner, I'm never writing a book again, because I did find it a hard slog. But, with the passage of time, I've perhaps changed my mind a little bit and am more open to writing another book. But look, I found it very, very enjoyable and rewarding at times, and quite difficult at others. And I think that for me, that was a reflection of the subject matter that I was dealing with. I think there was quite a bit in the book, as I mentioned earlier, about family violence and sexual violence. I wrote a bit about a particular quite tragic case in Australia where an Aboriginal man had killed his partner. And it was a topic that I felt I couldn't shy away from, because it was so prominent in the case law. Issues around men killing women, but it was also, really confronting and difficult. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, actually, that sometimes venturing into this territory can be hard work, not just so much because of the content itself, but I felt so worried about getting it right and doing justice to the issues that I was writing about, and I felt very concerned that I would write about these issues insensitively at some stage. So I think that is why I found it such a challenging book to write at times. But it was really wonderful when I finished it, and it felt like I had a great sense of achievement, and I was so grateful to all of the people who had helped me along the way. And yeah, ultimately very glad that I wrote it, and was really shocked and thrilled, actually, to win the prize. It was a lovely reward, and to find out during COVID, when life was not easy, was just such a lovely bonus too.
A worthy reward for all that hard work. Yeah. And just a final question, Kate, is you've won a book prize. You've written, I think am I right in thinking you've written 2 or 3 books? You've won, big research grants. Basically, you're a very successful academic. Do you have any advice, or researcher or activist, or I'm not sure how you sort of identify yourself, perhaps all of those things. Do you have any advice for early career researchers who might be starting out in socio-legal research?
Yeah, I think, I guess a few lessons from my own career. I think it's really worth seeking out mentors early on. People, there are a lot of very generous early and mid and more senior career researchers around the place who are very engaged and committed to helping further the careers of early career researchers. And so if you come across people like that, or people whose work you admire, I would encourage you to contact those people and seek them out and ask them for advice, and not be afraid to do that. I've done that in my career, and I've benefited enormously from the guidance of more senior people who have been really generous to me, and I'm always willing to pay that back too if people contact me. So that would be one thing. I guess the other is that I think in the kind of context of academia at the moment, the sector is really undergoing a crisis, and there are so many challenges for those of us who work in academia, and there's a lot of pressure to win grants and to pursue research that is understood sort of sometimes quite narrowly to have a particular kind of utility. But I have always felt that the research that I enjoy doing the most and that I have succeeded the most with is where I'm really driven by a particular passion or a concern, and it really propels me forward. And in this project, there were lots of things that interested me and many things that concerned me, including the treatment of children and child protection issues in law. And I know that's obviously an area of great interest and expertise for you, Simon, in your work, which is just fantastic work. But for me, the thing that came through so much in this research was the treatment of family violence and sexual violence. And I felt compelled to write about it. And I think if you can work from a place of passion like that, where you feel there's something really important to say, then I encourage people to anchor themselves to that passion, and if possible, and because I think that often leads to really, really good work and really valuable work if you're coming from a place of coming essentially from a political position that of issues that concern you. So I guess those would be the two main things.
Great advice. Is there anything else, Kate, before we stop the sort of recorded interview that you would like to say, or don't feel like you have to? If we feel like we've covered everything, then...
Oh, just a couple of key things to say, which of course is to thank the SLSA for the prize, which is a great honour. And as I said, genuinely, it was a real shock when I won, and I was just so thrilled. It was such wonderful news, and I still feel so pleased to have had my book honoured in that way. As I mentioned earlier, I thank the Research Council that funded the project. I also had the benefit of an advisory board of people that helped guide the research, and there's too many people to name, but I do want to acknowledge them and all of the participants who gave of their time. And obviously to you, Simon, who I know you've gotten up in the early hours of the morning in the UK to do this interview. So thanks so much. It's lovely to see you and to have a chat.